Hello, I'm Paul Schrantz, Director of Business Development and Client Success for Vendor Centric, your one source for procurement, contracting, and third-party management solutions. Welcome to our Expert Insights interview. This is a series of interviews where we will take a few minutes to talk with our colleagues and friends to share their expert insights about important topics of interest. In today's interview, we have Gavin McCarthy, co-founder and partner of Vendor Risk. We are an authorized consulting partner for Vendor Risk and work with Gavin and his colleagues to help enterprise organizations in highly regulated industries implement their acclaimed vendor lifecycle management system. Our discussion today is about the important role of identifying your vendor population and creating a central repository of your vendor profiles as the first building block of vendor lifecycle management. So welcome, Gavin. It's great to see you today. How you doing?
You too. Thanks, Paul.
Great. I'm looking forward to spending a few minutes with you on the whole topic of vendor lifecycle management and then talk about that first building block. But I would love to see if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Vendor Risk.
Sure. I'm one of the founding partners here at Vendor Risk. We originally started the company back in 2000 as a web design and development shop. It was kind of during that time that we were working with a bank customer on a vendor management application. That project would end up actually being the beginnings of Vendor Risk. We realized there was a huge need for standardization and organization of third-party vendor management. So fast forward to 2009, we ended up launching Vendor Risk, and the timing was actually pretty serendipitous. This Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, was created in the following summer, which formalized guidance stating that companies needed to have a program or system to manage their service provider relationships. And in 2020, we continue to work with banks and credit unions, but have grown to include a variety of other industries. And as you can imagine, vendor management has become a key pillar for every organization, especially as companies rely more heavily on third parties for critical parts of their business. Mm-hmm. So our customers continue to depend on our platform to provide them a standard framework to understand those relationships and remain compliant.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Can you elaborate just a little bit more on vendor lifecycle management, kind of your thoughts on vendor lifecycle management, your approach to it as an organization,
Sure.
How you guys kind of, align your system to support it?
Yeah. Well, I've heard the process of vendor lifecycle management described as a cradle to grave approach when you're thinking about your vendors. Kind of extending that analogy, though, in my experience, the lifecycle actually begins prior to birth. The process really involves three phases: the pre-contract, the contract, and the post-contract. And probably the most important step, and the reason we built our product, it really happens in that pre-contract phase. This is where you perform your initial due diligence, you review the prospect's financials, you perform OFAC and background checks. You conduct an initial risk assessment to understand the business impact and regulatory risk to your organization. Once the contract has been signed, your work isn't over, though. You need to manage that contract, like staying on top of expirations and continually monitoring the vendor's performance. This includes reviewing documents like SOC reports and financials. And finally, a post-contract step occurs when the relationship is terminated. This is actually kind of an important step still.
Yeah.
To communicate with the vendor and identify that any data that they may have had access to. So coordinating that data retrieval and or destruction is important to ensure that you aren't exposed at any point. The primary benefits of following this process are to map out expectations between your organization and the vendor and standardize a method of evaluating your vendors. So really, your vendors can have a direct impact on your organization. We know that to be true. Just look at the headlines, any of the latest data breaches, what happens to organizations. So continually monitoring your vendors during this contract phase can prevent or at least lessen the impact that some of these during these adverse events that you can have in your organization.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. That's really interesting, and I love your perspective about that multi-phase, that life cycle approach, but really talking about how it extends before and after relationship, and you've got to make sure that contracts and everything is integrated through the process to ensure your success. Well, let's talk for a second about this whole concept of this first step, getting that vendor population identified, getting the vendor profiles created, and creating a central repository. We often refer to it as that first building block of vendor management. Talk a little bit about how you guys, how vendor risk is a great solution, and how you guys approach kind of helping. I know what we do to help organizations address that population piece. I'm curious your thoughts around pulling it all.
Sure. When we begin talking to our clients, we stress to them that not all vendors are created equal. So it's imperative to identify who your vendors are and what they're actually going to be doing for you. So some vendors might have access to critical systems that could pose a significant threat to your company's operations. Therefore, it's important to create a central repository for your vendor profiles. That way you can see where the risks lie and where to focus your attention. By standardizing the practice of reviewing your vendors, you gain a better understanding of how they conduct their business. So the ins and outs of how they're doing their business. The process also raises everyone's expectations and creates a transparent working relationship to prevent any surprises. There's greater accountability when you're closely monitoring your vendor relationship. So that's where vendor risk comes in. So you can actually see what's going on. So centralizing that data into one system has the added benefit of giving your entire organization access to it. So it's not sort of isolated in one spot that doesn't talk to other systems. So vendor managed should actually be a cross-functional discipline that involves everyone from the business owner to information security to legal and finance. If COVID has actually taught us anything, it's that our vendors are even more critical to our success. We must have a shared responsibility of our vendor success, and that starts with building a framework that gives us insight into those relationships.
That's great. So I just have one time for one more question, and as I reflect on the couple things we've spoken about, just be curious on your feedback and thoughts around what are some of the key functionality that people should be looking for. We have a lot of organizations that are looking at technology, as we just discussed, the importance of it, being able to centralize and streamline a lot of those business processes. What are some key features or functionality people should be looking for in a vendor lifecycle management system?
Yeah, it's a great question. Any tool that you use needs to have a way to track your vendors and a way to communicate with them directly. So that's kind of core to the experience of any software you pick. Ideally, it's a web-based tool that's accessible across the organization. So give multiple users access to it. At a minimum, the system should include a way to onboard your vendors. And this includes activities like collecting documents, soliciting responses to your diligence questionnaires. But ideally, there needs to be a method to assess the criticality of your vendor relationships. And this can take the form of a scored questionnaire that helps highlight any risk that the vendor might pose to your organization. But as you are loading all this data should also be portable, meaning that it can be moved between systems via exports or APIs. Another key feature of any system are the automated email alerts and real-time reporting to let you know when specific events or issues require your intervention pop up. So no longer can you rely on a spreadsheet to handle the process. We continue to rely more heavily on third-party providers, and so we actually face this inevitable shift to needing a system that can automate this process. So that's kind of the keys to a product, any product you pick, that needs to have sort of that core experience.
That's great. Well, it's been great spending just a few minutes with Gavin. I think there's some great insights you shared for our viewers. And I really hope that you have a great day and appreciate all the great work you and your team at Vendor Risk do.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It was my pleasure.
All
Have
right.
a safe and happy Thanksgiving, man.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.